Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. We took last week off with Joe and myself traveling back from the All-Star Games. I was down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Joe at the East-West Shrine Bowl in Frisco, Texas. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. But of course, there's been a crazy amount of Steelers news since we last spoke with you guys. Some of this is now kind of old news, but we did want to give our take on it since we haven't yet. We're going to start the show off by talking about the Mike McCarthy hire as the Pittsburgh Steelers' next head coach. Then we're going to talk about his coaching staff because he's rapidly filled that out. Probably getting close to being done at this point. A couple more positions maybe to fill and maybe some random assistants to add along the way, but mostly filled out. And then we'll give our winners and losers from the All-Star games with some quick takeaways from those. I'm Ross, and above me here on the screen is Joe Clark. Joe, it's just a couple weeks now until we are at the Combine. This is one of the craziest times of year. How are things up your way?
Pretty good. Got back from an ice storm in Texas, and we have not had a day above freezing since I've gotten back.
Oh no.
But other than that, everything's going well.
Yeah, the ice is just finally pretty much all gone here in Nashville. I almost didn't make it down to Mobile because the only way out of my neighborhood is a big hill, and it was frozen solid, like 2 inches thick of ice. Fortunately, I was able to figure it out and got down there just in time. I literally pulled in to Mobile like as the first practice began on Tuesday afternoon. Usually I get down there on Monday for the opening press conference and stuff, and so I was cutting it very close, but somehow made it for the opening bell. We'll talk about that stuff in a bit, but of course the big news, this was, I guess, almost, when was this? This was at the end of the week, a couple weeks ago, that this was announced. Mike McCarthy hired as the Steelers' next head coach, the fourth head coach dating back to 1969. They broke precedent with him, if you want to call it precedent. Art Rooney II was kind of resistant to say that there was any kind of precedent or type that they look for in a head coach. He even pointed out that had Joe Paterno been willing to come to the professional ranks, then we probably wouldn't have been talking about this, oh, we only hire young, inexperienced guys type of thing. And so the Steelers didn't view it that way. And lo and behold, they hired a 62-year-old with, 19 years or 18 years? How many years of coaching experience? It's up there. 18 maybe? I can't remember the exact number right now.
Experience, I think we're at 19.
Yeah, right up there. He's up in the, not too far behind Mike Tomlin in the all-time wins list. He has a Super Bowl, of course, over the Steelers in 2010. A little bit better playoff record than Tomlin, though not lately. I think he had a win with the Cowboys in there in his last tenure, but otherwise, some similar kind of, I guess, complaints about McCarthy along the way. Of course, he's an offensive-minded guy, and so, again, every type or precedent thrown out the window. The Steelers went a different direction, and I think in a lot of ways fans were wanting a different direction. Maybe not this different direction, but they get what they get, and this is what it is. Joe, what was your initial reaction? How has it aged now that we're a couple weeks into this thing? How are you feeling right now about it?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction was pretty similar to I think a lot of people's. I was a little bit, not to say not happy, maybe a little bit bummed out because I was kind of selling myself into one of the younger coordinators that they had interviewed, and that's kind of, I think, the direction we thought they were going to go based off their past precedent. But the more time's gone on, the more people I've talked to, the more he's filled out his staff. The more I'm good with the hire. I think it's not that necessarily McCarthy has himself developed a ton of quarterbacks, but he's had a hand in the development of a lot of, pretty talented quarterbacks, and the Steelers need somebody to be their quarterback of the future. They need to find their next quarterback, and he's been involved with teams finding their next quarterback. I think he's the right hire for now, even if it's, only a short-term bridge hire and they make another hire. within the next couple of years because McCarthy's older. He's 62. I think, he can keep them on a stable track and get them on the right path to developing the next quarterback. Obviously, he has, Pittsburgh guy has a ton of love for the city. I don't think he's going to, check out of this job at any point. I think he's going to do everything in his power to make things work. He'll be involved, in the draft. He'll be involved in free agency. So I think, even though maybe it wasn't what I wanted initially, I think that it's a hire that I will end up working out, and we'll look back on it, and maybe we'll second guess if one of these coordinators ends up becoming a dynamite head coach in a few years, we can second guess it. But I think for where the Steelers are at right now, it's a hire that will wind up working itself out.
Yeah, of our kind of short list that I think we compiled an episode or two ago of the show, I think Shula was high up on that. Shieldhouse was in that mix. I like Clint Kubiak, or sorry, not Clint, Clay Kubiak. I think the only one of those names that actually ended up with a head coaching job, Jesse Minter, that was on that list with the Ravens. And so I think, unfortunately, we may be looking back at this as like, oh my gosh, how did the Steelers let this happen? The Ravens got Minter. I don't know if they would have been able to land Minter because he did have Baltimore ties and stuff like that. But what I'm trying to say is most of these candidates didn't even end up getting a head coach job. So what does that tell you? There were 10 spots open, almost unprecedented. And, some of these guys didn't get jobs. They may say that they wanted to return to their teams, and maybe there's some truth to that. Like somebody like Shieldhouse is now probably going to, I don't know if it's been made official or what's happening there, but I would imagine he's the inside track for the offensive coordinator in Los Angeles, with LaFleur being hired away. And so all that to say, yeah, the Steelers, we aren't going to have to look back, at least not this year, and be like, oh my gosh, why didn't they hire Shieldhouse? So I think I'm in the same boat as you. I could talk myself into just about anything. I'm come around on McCarthy, like you said, with the hires that he's made, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. I do think that just kind of hindsight 2020, but looking back at what Art Rooney said in his press conference, we should have seen this coming from a mile away. I wrote about that shortly after the hire was made. And my rationale was a couple of comments that Art Rooney made that were kind of overlooked. One of them being somebody that has experience is going to be important. And I think, I don't know why that comment didn't really get drilled in as much as it probably should have been. There were only a few candidates with actual experience that they interviewed. Brian Flores, Mike McCarthy, who else? Did I miss anyone else in there? I think there was one more maybe that had head coach experience. But point being, their final list of guys who came in for in-person included the guys with experience. And so that is what they were looking for. Art Rooney didn't want to have a rebuild. He said outright, I don't like that word. He said that in the past. We've heard that in the past. The Rooney family does not believe in tearing things down. They still believe they can compete. And, from the perspective of the guy who's bankrolling the team, you're paying a guy like TJ Watt, 40-something million. Fans might be down on them, but the bank account the bank withdrawals are not down on him. So somebody like Art Rooney is inclined to want to compete now. And, I don't think he's totally off base. Do I think the Steelers are a Super Bowl team? No, but, could they be competitive, and could they even be slightly more successful than this past year? Sure, they could. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of issues with this year's team, and there were a lot of kind of young, positive things about the team as well. I think guys like Joey Porter Jr. is ready to break out. Derek Harmon showed a lot of promise despite kind of having some setbacks with the injury. There's the young offensive line, which, yeah, they didn't have a great playoff game there, but not very many people do against Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. And so there's a lot of things to be optimistic about. And now there's a new, fresh perspective on it with a pretty much fully stocked coaching staff at this point. Joe, where to begin with the coaching staff? I guess I'll let you take that away.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can start with the first hire, which is one of my favorite hires, is Patrick Graham. He was the Raiders coordinator through 3 coaching regimes. He was brought on by Josh McDaniels, went through with Antonio Pierce, and then with Pete Carroll. I think, his defense has been fairly solid given the amount of money that the Raiders have pumped into their defense, which has not been much at all. He's been scheme adaptable. He's a former Belichick assistant in New England. I think he was also defense coordinator with the Giants, and I think the Dolphins as well. So he's been around the block, and he's for the most part had success everywhere he goes. So I was excited that they hired Graham. I think he is a good fit for the Steelers personnel. One other thing that's kind of stood out about the staff as a whole that I like personally is they've brought in a number of former players as coaches. Jari Evans was the first one as the assistant offensive line coach. Also brought in Jason Simmons, former Steeler, as their secondary coach and passing game coordinator. Damata Pico is their defensive line coach, and CJ Ayu is an outside linebackers coach. So that's, I think, four former players that I hired. Two of them, and Ayu and Pico, don't even have any NFL experience, which I think is interesting. I think it's kind of nice to get some, maybe fresh blood in there, guys who are eager and, can bring what they've done at a high level in college over the last year, in Ayu's case, the last couple of years. Or no, I'm sorry, Pico coached with the Cowboys, so he does have NFL experience, but Ayu does not have any NFL experience. So that'll be interesting to see. I'm kind of a fan of going to the college ranks. They got Sean Howe, who's the other coach who doesn't have any NFL coaching experience. Yeah, Montana State defensive coordinator, and he's gonna also be an outside linebackers coach. Um, I like that about the staff in general. Brian Angelichio, I'm gonna mispronounce that name probably a million times before I pronounce it right, is the offense coordinator. They retained Tom Arth at quarterbacks coach. Ramon Young was the assistant offensive line coach in Dallas. He comes in as running backs coach. Adam Henry was the Bills receivers coach. He comes over as a Steelers receivers coach. James Campen, a longtime McCarthy assistant, comes in as offensive line coach. Frank Cincinnati Jr., senior offensive assistant. They retained Scott McCurley. He's a longtime McCarthy assistant before he joined the Steelers last year as their inside linebackers coach, and he will keep that role with Pittsburgh. Who else have we not touched on? Joe Witt Jr., Commanders defense coordinator. He was with McCarthy in Dallas, is the secondary coach and assistant head coach. Brought in Pat Riley, not the NBA legend Pat Riley, the defensive quality control coach Pat Riley, who former Texans assistant. He's been with a few teams. Danny Crossman, special teams coordinator. He was most recently in Miami, and then brought in a few strength and conditioning coaches and retained Justice Galak from the last staff, but we don't know have any real structure there either. So, all in all, I mean, a lot of coaches with McCarthy ties, but there's also been a few that don't have any ties. And I don't really understand. And I think you're on the same boat. Some of the criticism that, he's hiring too many people that he's had in the past because, well, a lot of it worked in the past to begin with. So that's number one. And number two is every single coach hires people that they've worked with in the past. So just a matter, I mean, the Ravens are getting applauded for hiring Anthony Weaver. Well, he worked with Jesse Minter in the past. There's a reason why he's going to Baltimore. It's a business where guys are going to hire people they're familiar with and share the same philosophies with. But I also think McCarthy's taken a few swings and hired guys that he hasn't worked with. And I think overall it's a pretty solid mix. And on paper, it's a staff that I'm, fairly excited about.
Yeah, there's some of these guys that he not only does he not have ties to, but usually you can find ties to, maybe if it's a defensive assistant, maybe a tie to the defensive coordinator. There's some of these guys that don't even have ties to really anyone as far as we can tell. And so, that tells us that they had their ear to the ground, kind of seeing what's out there in terms of up and coming talent. I don't know where they really identified some of these guys, but yeah, they're looking for young, hungry, up and coming type of guys to add to their staff of, mostly veteran kind of coaches. As you said, the too many McCarthy ties narrative is bunk. I think there's 9 from the Packers staff, 4 from his Cowboys staff, one of those being from both Scott McCurley, who was, of course, retained already on the Steelers staff, one of his Packers players, 7 from neither organization, and 3 total retained from Tomlin's staff. And so he's got a really good mix. I mean, that's probably about what you'd see from most hires. I haven't stacked that up against somebody like, say, Jesse Minter in Baltimore, but I'd guess it's probably pretty similar. Maybe slightly less just because he's never been a head coach and whatnot. But yeah, and on top of you saying has worked in the past. I think a lot of people look at his Cowboys tenure as such a failure because, maybe they underperformed in certain moments. They had that really bad playoff loss to the Packers that stands out. I think it was to the Packers in 2023 that really
Yeah.
stands out as like a blemish. But he had 3 straight seasons of 12-5. I mean, people talk about Mike Tomlin, Mister 9-7 or whatever they like to say. I think a lot of people would sign up for 12-5. That's going to win the division almost every year. That's going to put you in position to potentially get a first round bye in some years. So sign me up for 12-5, no doubt, and we'll see what happens from there. And on top of that, a lot of the Packers guys that, yes, it is a Packers heavy staff, 9 total guys with Packers connections so far. Most of those guys haven't been with McCarthy his last year in Green Bay was 2018. So at least 8 years. Some of these guys weren't with him the last year he was there either. So, some of these guys haven't been with him for a decade. They've been elsewhere picking up ideas from other teams. I mean, think about how much you learn and grow in 10 years in any job. These guys have learned things that they're going to now bring to Pittsburgh staff. It's not just going to be the exact same, like, oh, Mike McCarthy's running things the way he did in Green Bay a decade ago with all of his friends. That's a ridiculous thought. So, I don't know how many other... I did want to ask, do you have any early takeaways in terms of how these hires, or how a specific hire or two, maybe it's the offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, wherever you want to start, may affect things schematically or personnel wise? Like, I don't know if you have one off the top of your head there.
I think with Graham defensively, the big thing about him is that he's so scheme adaptable that the Steelers can kind of mix and match with different looks. I mean, they've always been a 3-4 team. McCarthy said they're going to be a 3-4 team. Graham can kind of mix a little bit of both. There's different packages they can run. And the one thing about him that, and if you haven't checked it out, check out Alex's like big book of Patrick Graham on the site. It's well worth the read. But the way that his teams have limited the deep ball, I think that's huge because the Steelers have gotten burned so often by just chunk gains. Not even necessarily you think of the deep ball, you think 70-yard touchdowns. The Steelers got burned so many times by 20-yard chunk gain, 20-yard chunk gain, like over the middle of the field or down the sideline. It's over the last few years, it's been the biggest thing that will kill them. I mean, we joked earlier this season, got better towards the end of the year, but you'd rather have 3rd and 3 than 3rd and 13 because they're going to find a way to beat them. I mean, I go back to that Patriots game earlier this season, which they ended up winning, but it seemed like somebody was wide open over, the middle of the field for, a 15+ yard gain. And Graham really emphasizes taking away a lot of the deep stuff in his Packers teams, even if their defense as a whole didn't perform up to the level you'd like. They did a good job taking away the deep ball. So I think that's something that could be huge for the Steelers, especially, with the pass rush they have there. If the DBs are really prioritizing taking away the deep ball, I think that's going to end up being a really good thing. And I just like his flexibility. I'm really intrigued to see how he works with a defense that, on paper has much more talent than what he's worked with the last few years.
Yeah, along the defensive lines, I'll continue there. I think a lot of people wanted Brian Flores for the reason of, oh, this is a guy that likes the blitz. He can bring back Blitzburg. And, maybe Graham isn't quite as blitz happy. Again, this is something that Alex covered thoroughly in his big book of Patrick Graham. But they had a fair amount. He's known for liking to blitz a little bit. And so guys like Patrick Queen, guys like Peyton Wilson. I did a study, I guess it was a couple years ago because Landon Roberts was still around, of just highlighting, they have guys who actually excel in those blitz scenarios at the inside linebacker position. The Steelers haven't really gotten sack production that is, from inside linebackers since Vince Williams, like all those years ago. It's been in like a basically straight line down trend line for how many sacks they get from the inside linebacker group as a whole. Yet they have Peyton Wilson, who I believe was like top 5 or something in all of college football for sacking the quarterback. You have Patrick Queen, who was very productive in that manner with the Baltimore Ravens. So this is another thing that could potentially get interesting the Steelers maybe got less sacks than you would like last season. Maybe that's because of Highsmith's injury, Watt's down year, whatever you want to blame it on. But if that's going to be the case, they need to find ways to get creative and still generate pressure. And I think Patrick Graham is somebody that can hopefully coax that out of the group. In terms of offense, I mean, Angelico has a tight end background, which I thought was interesting. He was a tight end coach for a while, much like Arthur Smith, who was a tight end coach. I don't think he's. I mean, first of all, he's not the play caller, so it's not his offense. This is going to be a Mike McCarthy, West Coast kind of situation. So that has its own set of personnel groupings, if you will. Arthur Smith liked to use 12, 13. You even saw 14, which means 2, 3, 4 tight ends on the field at the same time. With McCarthy, we're probably going to see a lot less of that, though. The NFL is evolving in that direction, so maybe he kind of adapts slightly, and certainly it would make sense the way the Steelers are built with Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington, and we'll see what happens with Jonnu Smith, everybody's favorite. But in general, I think we're going to see more 2, 3, maybe even 4 wide receiver sets. And what does that mean? That means the Steelers have got to go out and find receivers. They got to probably sign a semi-significant one in free agency, whether that's like I think a lot of people have thrown out like an Alec Pierce or those kind of names. That would be certainly great if they could do that. But they also need to go ahead and draft 1, maybe 2. The Steelers haven't made 12 picks in one draft class since 1992, and that was the last year that there were 12 rounds in the draft format. And so they actually have projected to have 12 picks in this draft. Chances are they aren't going to use all 12, but it would not be that hard to figure out a way to draft 2 receivers and maybe even 2 over the first 2 days, where the Steelers are projected to have 5 picks over those first 2 days. So I think that the McCarthy effect, we might see a whole bunch of new receivers in town to complement DK Metcalf. Whether that means, Calvin Austin III hitting free agency, I kind of lean towards him being gone now, to be honest. I don't know what's happening with Roman Wilson. I don't think anyone really does at the moment. If Aaron Rodgers comes back, poor guy might not see the field again unless he can gain his trust over the next however many months. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add there, Joe, in terms of the personnel stuff on offense.
Yeah, no, I think Roman Wilson could be a cut candidate next year if Aaron
Ooh.
Rodgers comes back, honestly. I would not be surprised, depending on who they add in free agency. If he's their 5th receiver and you're not using him on special teams, then what's the point? So I wouldn't be surprised if going into training camp we're talking about Roman Wilson fighting for a roster spot. But yeah, that's really all I had.
And what are we talking about with running backs? Because, man, Caleb Johnson was drafted to be an Arthur Smith guy. Arthur Smith made it clear, this is the guy that can run my scheme. He can run the wide zone. I had to pivot from my scheme a year ago because we didn't have the personnel. So what did they do? They went and drafted Caleb Johnson because he was known for being able to run that wide zone. And he only had, 55 or 65 total offensive snaps on the year. Barely used. Had the big special teams mistake. The Steelers still have Jalen Warren under contract for, I think, 2 more seasons. Kenneth Gainwell, we'll have to see what happens there. But, gosh, I mean, if you had to guess right now, what's your running back room look like on game day next year? 1, 2, 3.
I don't really know what to do with Gainwell because I think he's deservedly earned himself a decently big contract, but it's also a pretty strong running back class. You have Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker at the top, and then you have another crop of guys like Gainwell's probably in. I just wonder if this staff is going to view him the same way as the old staff does. But again, Rodgers loves him, so if Rodgers comes back, then I could see them making a push to re-sign Gainwell. Either way, I think they'll at least try to re-sign him, but I also wouldn't be entirely surprised if he left. Like right now, I would probably think that Caleb Johnson might be the RB2 next season entering the year. I would not be surprised if Gainwell left. I could see them with one of their myriad of draft picks, like, taking a running back later, just signing a whatever veteran to be, in that third running back role. But I think right now I'm probably leaning towards Gainwell not being re-signed just because there's needs elsewhere. But I'm intrigued to see. I think his status is the one I'm most interested in terms of the Steelers' upcoming free agents and whether I really don't have an idea whether or not he's going to be re-signed or not.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of floated the idea in my Senior Bowl running back primer of like, could the Steelers draft another running back? I mean, probably not round 3, but could you look in round 4? I mean, I think that they could certainly. Especially, I mean, if Gainwell's gone, you almost have to. Um,
Yeah.
so something to think about. There's plenty more time to think and talk about the draft. So we're gonna shift to the All-Star Game stuff. Just talking about some winners and losers, some takeaways from the events. What I'll say about the Senior Bowl, just starting off, is the defensive line was dominant. I think last year was the year of the defensive line. Everybody was talking about, oh my gosh, there's so many defensive linemen, there's so many running backs. It didn't really seem like this defensive line class was going to live up to last year's, and I don't think it will in terms of number of guys taken, but in terms of like first round, second round, like first, I guess, top 50 picks, defensive linemen, I think it's competitive with last year. There's a lot of talent, and they were just dominating at the Senior Bowl, making life difficult, made it very hard to evaluate other things like offensive linemen were getting destroyed. So, it's kind of hard to evaluate the run game then because it's like, they're not totally tackling at these events. And so how are you really evaluating the running backs? The quarterbacks are, unfortunately, some of them were kind of happy to tuck the ball and run. I'm not going to say any names. Taylon Green. He did that almost every time there was pressure in his face. He would just tuck the ball and run. It's like, come on, everyone's here to see you throw. You're supposed to try and be a quarterback. So it was a little frustrating seeing that, not able to really evaluate some of these things. I guess I'll start with the losers here so we can move in a good direction after that. But I will say Taylon Green was one of my losers. I didn't have him jotted down here, but now that I think about it, he was, because, again, he wasn't like trying to maneuver the pocket and keeping his eyes up. He'd drop his eyes, tuck the ball, and run. And the few times he did throw the ball, man, sometimes it was like, wow, he evaded pressure and somehow chucked the ball downfield, and it went very far and it looked pretty. Other times it was like, what in the world? I thought Joe Milton was rough at the Senior Bowl a couple years ago in terms of being inaccurate. Taylon Green was rough at the Senior Bowl, so he was one of the losers. Diego Pavia, kind of similar issues, much different players. Pavia's like half of Taylon Green's height. So starting there, I think when you see a guy come in at 5'9" and whatever it was, 3/4, he needs to be like pretty perfect at the Senior Bowl and in general to be considered a good prospect. Think about Dylan Gabriel last year, kind of a similar short guy. Gabriel was actually pretty impressive at the Senior Bowl, I thought. So, that's why he ended up in the 3rd round. I do not see that happening for Diego Pavia. Again, dropping his eyes, running the ball too much. When he was throwing, it wasn't that impressive. He, was having a hard time seeing the middle of the field. Surprise, surprise there. Nick Singleton, the Penn State running back, I actually thought he looked pretty good up until, of course, he broke his foot. That's an unfortunate situation for him. Maybe unfortunate for him, but fortunate for whatever team gets him. Is that a guy the Steelers could look at in the 4th round if he somehow makes it there? I'd be intrigued by that because you don't necessarily need him this year, but that's a guy who can do it all. Explosive, he can run between the tackles, he can catch, he can pass block. He proved he could pass block at Mobile. That's something he wanted to do going into the event, and I thought he did. Jacoby Lane, receiver from USC, another guy who I would consider a loser. Just to me, I thought, I was kind of looking for him to be one of the better receivers there, and he didn't really stand out to me in that way. He's a 6'4" kind of guy, a big, tall. There was a couple of those in attendance in Mobile, but he didn't really stand out as one of the better ones. And, I thought at least from what I saw, I haven't done a deep dive on his tape yet, but just what I saw of highlights throughout the year of him and watching some college games, he was making some pretty spectacular catches in those games. For whatever reason, that was not the case in Mobile. He was having some drop issues, at least on day 1 and 2, I noticed that. So kind of a soft loser, but still a loser if I had to label them. I'll go through the winners a little quicker. Garrett Nussmeier, LSU quarterback. This is one that should be intriguing to Steelers fans just because he's kind of in that, like, well, they're not going to get Fernando Mendoza, so who next? Is it going to be this Trinidad Chambliss? I guess he's probably going to be in the draft class, so maybe. After him, it's, Ty Simpson, and then you're probably down to Garrett Nussmeier after that. And so could the Steelers take a chance on somebody like Nussmeier in, say, the third round? From what I saw at the Senior Bowl, third round, Steelers have 3 third-round picks. If they use like the second or third-round pick on him, I wouldn't hate it. I mean, it wouldn't be a home run by any means or anything like that, but this is a guy that had a abdomen or core injury in college, played through it, and was pretty ineffective as a result. He was spectacular in 2024. Looked like he was going to be a first-round pick, maybe the top quarterback in this class entering 2025. That didn't end up being the case because of that injury. He said at the Senior Bowl that he didn't even know the full extent of that injury until like a month ago. And so, this is something that probably should have had surgery, probably should have just sat out most of the season. But he looked healthy in Mobile. He really did. And he looked good. It was kind of like a so-so day 1. He got better on day 2. He was really good on day 3. And then he was the MVP of the game itself. And I thought he was the only real quarterback that looked NFL ready at all in that Senior Bowl game. So definitely a winner on my list there. Malachi Fields, receiver from Notre Dame, is another one, another big body guy, 6'4". He was making all the catches. He was standing out. He didn't have a spectacular season at Notre Dame, but man, I think he answered some questions in Mobile. He was getting himself open. Tyron Montgomery, a guy from John Carroll, small school. He only started playing football like a couple of years ago, and I think they found him on like TikTok or something, or like YouTube. Like he was just posting videos of him like playing football at the park or something. I don't know what it was, but basically he got discovered somehow online and ended up walking on with like tape online at John Carroll Small School. Became one of the best receivers in their program history. He was showing great stuff in Mobile. I do think he was an overall winner compared to expectations. He was making tough catches. He was very adept at creating separation. The one issue with him is you can tell he's kind of newer to football. There are some situations where it's like, all right, he got separation on a vertical route, but he's looking back for the ball too early, and he's giving up all this speed and letting the defensive backs catch up to him. In the NFL, that's not going to fly. So this is a guy that does need more development, but certainly an intriguing piece of clay. Ted Hurst, Georgia State, another intriguing piece of clay at receiver. He played 2 years at Valdosta State before transferring over to Georgia State. He wanted to make a legacy for himself there. He could have transferred just about anywhere in the year after a strong 2024 season. Decided he wanted to build a legacy at Georgia State, and so you respect that. And he immediately stood out at the Senior Bowl. He's 6'2". He ran well. This is a guy that if he has a nice combine, top 50 kind of potential, maybe is slightly outside of that, but he stood out. Barium Brown, LSU, shifty guy. He was a return specialist. I really liked him. He did it all well in Mobile, getting open and stuff like that. TCU safety Bud Clark, again, just kind of did everything well. He was flying all over the place, hitting hard, making interceptions. Probably the biggest standout in the secondary at Mobile. Lee Hunter, probably the best practice I've ever seen at the Senior Bowl. I probably should have mentioned him at the top here, but that first day of Senior Bowl practice is the day I was watching the trench play, and he was unblockable, and he's a big guy. He looks like he looks kind of like a Javon Hargrave, maybe slightly shorter, slightly thicker, but just kind of that body type. I always thought Javon Hargrave had a unique body type, and Lee Hunter has that. And he was finding ways to dart into the backfield, disrupt. He was winning every single one-on-one in the team session. It was unreal how much he was disrupting things. Pitt linebacker Kyle Lewis, shout out to him as well. Obviously, being a Pittsburgh college player there should be interesting to some people, but probably the best linebacker in attendance. And there were some pretty good linebackers, Rodriguez from Texas Tech being one of them, and I thought Lewis maybe even outshined him a little bit. So that was my list. I think I published the full list on the site, but Joe, sorry about the long-winded takes there. I'll let you take it away.
So we have a lot of these guys we also have published on the site between me, Josh, and Dr. Mel. But I'll also start with the losers. Number one, Cade Klubnik, probably the most hype of any player heading into the Shrine Bowl, and he just wasn't very good. He was okay in the throwing session. I mean, he was just there's throwing on air. He looked okay, fine. Um, First day of practice, he was decent. After that, he was just pretty bad, pretty mediocre to bad. Um, and then he didn't play in the game, so he really did himself no favors. Just wasn't a very good practice. I mean, he was, hyping his teammates up and doing all the things that you like to see out of a quarterback, on the sidelines, but he just wasn't very good on the field. And for somebody who didn't have a great season last year after getting some first round buzz before the year, I just really didn't see it with him. Another guy that didn't help himself was Patrick Payton as an edge, transferred to LSU after playing at Florida State. He only had one sack last year, but he had like seven the year before his sophomore year at Florida State. Just kind of excited to see him, one of the better edge rushers of the group heading in, but he was just okay. He didn't really stand out in any meaningful way. It was like 50-50 on winning his one-on-ones, didn't really do much in team. And, similar to the Senior Bowl, the offensive line kind of struggled. The defensive line was dominant. The pass rush got home often, which did make it hard to evaluate in some instances, but he wasn't really one of those edge rushers who stood out. Haynes King from Georgia Tech, he threw four interceptions and had probably the worst practice I've seen on the first day of practices. So that's going to land you on the losers list. Um, he was okay the rest of the week, but I don't really see much of an NFL future for him. Dante Corleone from Cincinnati, I was really really excited to see him coming into the week. I actually had a pretty good conversation with him on Thursday. Practices started on Friday. He re-aggravated a pre-existing tightrope injury and
Hmm.
was in a boot the rest of the week and did not participate. So really only on the losers list because of the injury. He looked good when he was out in the field on Friday. Um, but he's had a history of injuries. He had a deep vein thrombosis, some blood clots that almost ended his career 2 years ago. Missed the beginning of this season with an injury. So definitely a concerning medical background that teams are going to have to look into. And then the other one is just the game itself. For whatever reason, just more guys than ever. Players always opt out of the game. And listen, I'm in favor. If you go and you tear up practice for 3 days and you don't want to play in the game, you've shown enough. You've met with every team. The scouts have seen what they need to see. That's fine. But this year in particular, because of the ice storm, scouts were flying out. They weren't around to watch a lot of practice. They could watch the practice tape fine, but a lot of guys who weren't very good in practice weren't playing in the game. Ahead of the game, the roster sheet, I think there was 53 listed opt-outs. I think that was incorrect because some of the guys that were listed as opting out did end up playing in the game. So I think it ended up being around 50 or 51 who didn't play, but that's still a huge number. And I just don't understand if you're somebody, like Cade Klubnik, who didn't have a good week of practice, why you wouldn't then go and play in the game and try to, salvage the week and end the week on a high note and, get some good tape out. But so I think that's an issue. That's something that's got to get figured out going forward. In terms of winners, Iowa's Mark Gronowski was really steady at quarterback. I thought he was the best quarterback. Him and Kansas, Jalen Daniels were the two best quarterbacks, I think, throughout the week. Gronowski ended up, winning the game. His team won. He played, really solid. His teammate, Caden Wien his teammate from Iowa, he was a return specialist. He only had 20 receptions last year, but he looked dynamic on the field. His short route running was super impressive. He's one of those guys. He struggled a little bit against press coverage because he's super small, but he's one of those guys that I think if you find a way to get the ball in his hands, he's going to be a playmaker, and I think somebody's going to take a chance on him. Maybe earlier than we think. I think heading in to the Shrine Bowl week, he was probably projected day three, maybe priority UDFA, but I would not be surprised if he ended up early day three. Maybe not day two. Day two feels a little rich, but I could see him being an early day three guy. Mason Reiger out of Wisconsin. He started at Louisville, transferred last year to Wisconsin. He's kind of got the same, jacked up build that these Wisconsin edge rushers have had. The Steelers have two of them. He had three sacks in the game throughout the week. He was consistently getting pressure. He showed off a good array of pass rush moves. He was winning his one-on-ones. I was impressed with what I saw from him, and then he really, really turned on in the game. Jaden Duggar, he's a Penn Hills kid from Louisiana. He had multiple interceptions throughout the week in practice, good coverage, good instincts. He's somebody that I think really helped himself. And then Michael Wortham from Montana, he was a late ad. I dinged him earlier in the week in my notes because he had a couple just really, really good routes, found himself wide open and couldn't haul on the ball. Towards the end of the week, his drop problems seemed to kind of sort themselves out, and he was making a lot of plays. I do think, I saw it enough that the drop problems might be there and they might still exist, but he's a really good route runner. He's really fast. He had a nice return in the game. I think he's somebody that helped himself out and could be a sneaky late rounder UDFA this season.
Interesting. Yeah, I was interested to hear how Klubnik did, and was kind of surprised that he didn't look good in that setting. So bummer for him, because yeah, I mean, Garrett Nussmeier is kind of the opposite story to me. Is that they were both hyped up before this season, both didn't do well this season, and Nussmeier kind of turned things around, and maybe turned out he had an okay excuse to not have a good season, and Klubnik on the other hand, yikes. So. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the quarterback class shakes out. It's crazy to think that just a year ago this was supposed to be such a good class. I remember talking about it on this podcast. So 2027, I guess that one's the next great class. But I guess we'll see. There's
We'll see a year from now.
Yeah.
Maybe having the same conversation.
We might. I think Doug Whaley said that the Steelers should wait till 2028. So we'll just keep kicking the can down the road. Normally, we would do a listener question, 412-254-3145. Brett, thank you for the question. I promise you we will answer it, but we are running low on time. We had a lot to catch up on since we missed the show last week. So thank you for the question, and please, everybody else, send in more, 412-254-3145. I'm Ross, that's Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.